Welcome back to the Best Ball Happy Hour here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle. Joined today, first up, usually here from Underdog, who just launched a new tournament as well. It's Hayden Winks. Hayden, how's it going?
Very good. Very excited to talk about this new tournament.
And we will do so throughout the show. But first up, let's go ahead and get him on from Fantasy Life, formerly 4for4, until he was Judas. It is the great Chris Allen. Chris, how are you doing?
What's going on, brother? Me, Judas. I mean, I can check our DM history. The last time that you and I did a show together was October of 2021. We did
That's
like
amazing.
a DFS show together at a former employer of ours. And since then, dude, I've been ghosted. So now, like 2 years later, I'm not Judas. I'm the prodigal son at this point, getting invited onto a show with you. But man, happy to be here and to kick with you guys for an hour or so.
You could check the DM history, but if you check, well, I would say check the text history, but we also know whether it's you or Christina and everyone else, I'm absolutely awful at replying. So do not check the
That's
text
100%
history.
correct. Yeah.
And then we brought on Todd from PA from Sharp Football, who's hosting the Best Ball shows. But it's time to run it back from Sharp Football. My very good friend, Rich Rebar, Roto Reeves. How are you doing?
What's going on, guys? Yeah, it's exciting to get in the room with you guys. We don't all spend enough time together. I got to spend some time at Chris in person a couple weeks ago. Daigle, you were there too, but I see you all the time, so it's nothing new.
We're the two who get to see each other all the time. All right, boys. So we're all going to draft together here. If you want to go ahead and jump in, we will do a Best Ball Mania, and then throughout that draft, we'll talk about it. But Hayden, while we're going, you can also tell us about the new contest at Underdog, since it involves different strategy from epic proportions.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely new style fantasy game. Like, there's nothing ever been like this ever. So it's called Weekly Winners. You basically are drafting right now, and it's basically 17 DFS slates, but you draft your team now, no management, no setting your roster. It's all best ball draft strategy and whatnot. But now you have to choose which weeks you're going to be optimizing for. And the traditional roster construction and all that type of stuff is going to be wonky. Like, do you pull up just the week 8 schedule and just build teams around week 8? Do you draft the rookies? If you drafted Mahomes and Kelsey, do you even draft another tight end or quarterback? So a lot of the core best ball strategy will be there, but there's gonna be a lot of wrinkles with it. And since it's a brand new game that nobody's ever heard of, we won't know exactly what's optimal for a little bit.
I know you have an article dropping on what you believe early strategy is. Can you give us a couple of those nuggets to preview it?
Yeah, I just think that the roster construction where people are like, I like the 2-5-8-2 builds or whatever you like with those. I think that people are going to get very wonky with it. Like I mentioned, the onesies, I can see the elite onesies just sticking with them. I think people are going to go for the divisional stacks. I think people are going to stack up the bye weeks. My favorite complete galaxy brain thing would be to pull up the week 7 and week 13 schedules. Those are the 2 weeks with the most teams on bye. I would look at those schedules, then draft teams with the players that are available in those games, because there's only going to be so many players that can accrue points. So I would be focusing on those games. But there's so many little details with this. Like, do you draft Jameson Williams and a bunch of rookies and say, yeah, my team's not going to do well for the first 6 weeks, but since we're not advancing teams, that doesn't really matter as long as I have some advantages later in the season. So when you enter a draft room, there's going to be a million ways that you can go with this. I think people are going to be reaching more than they're typically reaching on. So there's going to be a lot of wrinkles here. And I think that it's going to be hard to predict what the person drafting next to you is going to be doing. It's not as simple as some of the core concepts we're looking at in like the Best Ball Mania draft.
Rich, I don't know if you're prepared to talk about strategy every single week through 17 games, but how have you been drafting so far for these early tournaments?
Yeah. I haven't not drafted any weekly winners teams. That's pretty curious. That's pretty interesting. I'll have to check that out too. I also haven't drafted any Chihuahua teams. That's the super flex one, right?
$4.25 max.
I haven't done that either, but I have fired off some Best Ball Mania bullets just to kind of get, stay on top of things with the drafts. And these underdog drafts, man, I mean, even going back to last year, everyone's so sharp. Everyone's just burying wide receivers. Our running backs again. Is this wide receiver crazy? I'm doing drafts like this week, and you're seeing guys that are available in like the 7th, 8th round, like guys that are like 3-down rolls, like Rashad White or James Conner. It's just like, what has happened to fantasy football these last couple of years, especially at a site that's not even full PPR. So it's just really wild to see how the seismic shift has come, because there's no other site you can go to where people draft like this. It's crazy, man.
Chris, what about your early thoughts as you've been drafting the past couple months as well?
Kind of similar to Rich, to be quite honest. And it was, I think, well, hell, we were headed to Buffalo, I think, and it was like the first time, like in the car drafting, like trying to figure out like what is going on with ADP. And I think the first time that I started drafting, it was, well, I'll just kind of stick with what we were doing last season. It was kind of strong to get like RBs, like maybe some of those guys like early, if you can hit the like the 1-2 turn, couple RBs, find some wide receivers late. No, I got slapped with reality real quick, because with wide receivers like flying off the board much earlier than they were last year. And over my last like 4 or 5 drafts or so, I've kind of capitulated, moved towards like trying to hit those wide receivers early, hits a couple of early round QBs to like pull up some of those like high end stacks. And then afterwards, kind of to you guys' point, finding the Rashad Whites, the Cam Akers, the Antonio Gibson, if you want to like, well, even wait a little bit longer for those guys that have similar projected volume that kind of fell into like the quote unquote dead zone that we were trying to avoid in the 4th, 5th, and 6th round of last year, that are available in like the 8th, 9th, and 10th round of this season. So I do like the fact that we've been able to find a bit more value in some of these like later round running backs. At the same time, it's kind of making me think, with everybody doing early round wide receiver, could there be some value in kind of hitting those early round running backs? I think that might be the case.
It seems like we have a stacked room too. I see Walter picks there. I think Sam Sherman. I wonder if that's Sam Sherman. Free Duke Johnson, of course. That's Ian Hartitz.
I know who that is.
I know Jordy as well. So we got a fun little room here. I was just doing I just completed a Dalmatian, so 101 entry, 3 max. And the wide receiver push was even more extreme there. I got Joe Burrow and Trevor Lawrence, who I don't even usually stack elite quarterbacks, but they fell 12 spots more than that past ADP, because the receivers are drafted. So everyone then waited on the quarterbacks. And so I said, screw it. I'll just take Tyler Boyd, I guess, and stack Joe Burrow if we're just going to let these quarterbacks fall to keep on hammering wide receivers early.
It's to me, if you can find a way to get the wide receiver points required without paying up for all these ADPs repeatedly over and over again, that's the key. So like my whole thing is, what's the minimum draft capital I could spend on wide receiver to still compete? And then I'm trying to get out of there. So I still think you need 4 to 5 decent ones, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be paying up for 6 or 7 decent ones at these price tags. I'm going to get in, kind of get out, and I'm going to try to push the minimum requirement to have at least some decent wide receivers.
Which spot are you drafting from, Rich?
I drew the lead and Chris drew 112, so we're bookending this
Perfect.
round.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Which was terrible for me because like we joked about the show. Like I'm terrible on these types of shows where you draft live anyways, because I talk through all the picks, and now you told me I have to manage my own board. Usually there's someone operating the queue, and so I'm trying to stay on top of things to make sure I don't miss any picks early on.
I'm doing the same thing, and now with my pickup, it's like, oh, okay, now I know what I'm supposed to do here. All right.
I kind of wanted to get weird, but I realized there was only 6 seconds on the clock when I was up for 101.
Yeah.
How'd you almost skip the 101?
I was just listening to, I was listening to Hayden talk, and I realized the draft started. I mean, listen, I you bring me on. I'm the not a color guy, man.
Just curious for you guys, real quick. What's the lowest time limit per pick do you think that we can get away with before people revolt?
Are you thinking about different formats?
I'm more of a boomer, man. I like the slow drafts more because I'm always doing something. I like to just kind of have my pick, get the alert on my watch or my phone, and say like, "Hey, you come pick." I don't do a lot of quick drafts because again, I am doing so many other things in life, man. I hate to lose track.
I'd say 15 seconds. If you did like a puppy style like buy-in with like a 15-second clock, I think people would do it.
Are you thinking about like dropping a lightning format where you have 10 seconds on the clock for every pick?
I would love it.
I'd be down.
Like the more we get used to it, I feel like we can kind of push the buttons, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think it would be fun. I think it'd be fun to at least experiment. The other crazy idea, I think I mentioned it before, was when you draft, all of a sudden two draft boards pop up. So it's like you get a multi-table, so you're getting 2 drafts in for the same amount of time, but everyone's under those same conditions. So you're going back and forth between tabs. Lots of chaos. We'll see what happens.
I've tried doing that multi-tabling drafting before, and I think both teams wound up being exactly the same. Like, not even by design. Like, I think I wound up screwing up. And it's like, why do I have Cortland Sutton on both? Oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just spitballing.
Chris, I noticed you double tapped wide receiver, Ramon Ra and Jalen Waddle. Are those 2 players you're usually targeting at the turn, or do you just keep mixing it up with different wide receivers?
So I've tried to be more cognizant this season about like who I'm drafting like early on. Because I know that with ADP being more or less like how folks like how the market can guide like our selections, especially in the early rounds, because we don't want to dither too much outside of like where guys are normally drafted. So I've actually started like just literally like writing down into a spreadsheet, like for the first 6 picks, who am I drafting typically? So if I get if I'm like here at the 112, what are my first 6 picks? So then if I come back and I get the 12 again, because folks could probably see like I passed up Devontae Adams. So maybe next time, instead of having the same combination of players, so like CD and Jalen, maybe it's Devontae and Jalen. Maybe it's Devontae and CD. Maybe it's Devontae and, I don't know, I reach for Nick Chubb or whatever the case may be. So those early round combos, they start to switch up. They're not reaches by any stretch, but it's more of just making sure that I'm maximizing my exposure to a lot of the players in the early round. But for this, sure, why not? Like I've written up the Detroit game. They're playing against Dallas, if I'm remembering correctly, in week 17. Love that matchup. And of course, Miami's matchup with Baltimore. I want to get as much exposure to that because what do they have? Like 80 some odd points, like when they played each other last season. So another game like I would want a high amount of exposure to with the 2 receivers that are going to be in that game and get high target shares. So these rolling out of the gate, kind of to what Hayden was talking about earlier, if I can get at least a number of at least 2, maybe 3 more wide receivers that kind of meet the requirements of I'm always competing on a week-to-week basis, those guys immediately fall into that bucket, and it's less I have to worry about for at least that position later on.
All I'm saying, Dan, as you ask if we're fading Tua, don't look at who's averaged 8.9 yards per attempt in the Super Bowl era on 400 passes. Just don't look at the historical stats. Even though Tua just burned to the ground bad defenses last year. Rich, you've already made 3 picks now. Go ahead and walk us through your thought process at the top.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I had the pick 1, so I just chalked it and took Jefferson. I actually was thinking about taking Tyreek Hill, but I panicked while I was on the clock just to try to build like a different, kind of weird team, especially while we're doing a live show. But yeah, if Chris, Amon-Ra went 1 pick, or CeeDee Lamb at 1 pick before you. Would you have done the stack that probably people do at the turn, the Amon-Ra, CeeDee Lamb together?
Probably, even though like if you want to like hop into, like DFS concepts, if I make it to week 17, I'm assuming that stack is going to be so common. Are you really going to be able to separate by doing that? I probably still would have done it though.
Yeah, that Detroit-Dallas game is really one of the games you get most unique with because of just how many guys are cheaper. Guys like, Dak and Goff go cheap. Laporta goes cheap. Jamison Williams is cheap. Michael Gallup, even Brandon Cooks, I think, is undervalued. So you can have a lot of fun with that game where you're just not doing, Pollard CD to open or Amon-Ra Pollard or CD Amon-Ra. So there's a lot of ways to get unique with that one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, listen, I had no plan. 2-3 came back to me. I just took one of the running backs that I believe has kind of one of like those apex ceilings in Breece Hall. I know people are scared of kind of the injury news, but I'm trying to, again, play for like the back quarter of the season anyways. And I just tapped T. Higgins, hopefully for some contingency upside, and maybe we can get some other pieces of that Chiefs-Bengals game along the way here.
Speaking of the Lions, whenever the initial promotion tweet went out that you 2 were coming on the show, Andy Behrens texted me, Rich, and asked me to ask you how you got Laporta in a recent Superflex draft as the tight end 3 when he should be tight end 1. I have no idea what league he's referring to, but apparently he was absolutely shocked that Laporta was still available as a tight end 3 in a rookie draft.
Yeah, I mean, that's where he goes, tight end 2, tight end 3. It was late. It was pick 208, so it was like way past ADP where he usually goes. So I had some trade offers on the board, but I'm kind of obsessed with Sam Laporta anyways. So I was like, I'm just going to take him and ignore some of these offers. But yeah, I think he's really interesting. You know, obviously rookie tight ends are fragile bets to make. But especially in these best ball formats, I think that he definitely has some juice, especially with Jamison Williams, you know, having the 6-game suspension. If you look at the way the Lions used their tight ends near the end zone last year, obviously everyone remembers the Shane Zylstra 3-touchdown game, but, you know, Brock Wright, James Mitchell. It was funny is after Hawkinson got traded, they just used their tight ends a ton with all these design plays inside the 10-yard line. So I'm hoping that Laporta gets some of that. And Laporta wasn't a guy that scored a lot of touchdowns in college, but he also played for a team that only threw 7 touchdowns last season at Iowa.
What?
So.
That is a wild stat.
Yeah.
In the year 2023 of modern football, a team, a big Power 5 program threw 7 passing touchdowns.
That's
Damn.
high T.
But you look at Laporta, like where he was utilized at Iowa. I mean, he was number 1 in this class in terms of being lined up out wide as a wide receiver. He's great after the catch. So I'm hoping a little bit of hope out for him, even in these best ball leagues where, you know, rookie tight ends, we're not really counting on him, but I'm going to throw some darts on him a little bit.
Is Laporta your favorite in best ball of the Musgrave and Mayer tier?
Oh, yeah. I like him outright more than Dalton Kincaid, too. I know Dalton Kincaid is the guy that is getting some steam here. Listen, if the Bills, if you wanted a slot receiver, you could have just taken an actual slot wide receiver, too. You know, that was an option.
Chris, I think it's now coming back to you. Or did you just picked? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
So go ahead and give us your 4th and 5th round breakdown.
So I went with Keenan Allen and Travis Etienne. Etienne, like I don't have a ton of exposure to with him at this point, which is why I wound up selecting him. But again, with Jacksonville, I know that most of the focus, and this kind of going back what we were talking about earlier from a DFS standpoint, a lot of the focus is going to be on the passing game. We've got like Christian Kirk, Calvin Ridley, both those guys going like relatively early. And of course, Trevor Lawrence like being pulled up along with him. So if we're thinking that the offense is going to be good, Travis Etienne, like while not the most efficient pass catcher, I know there have been some concerns about like his catch technique. I've seen folks like Matt Waldman and other people like trying to at least put us on like to the fact that that is some concern like with his game. He still is going to earn some targets within that offense. And while I'm at least somewhat cautious about what Tank Bigsby might be able to offer in year 1, it's not like we have like this massive concern about him losing work. I liken the Etienne Bigsby situation to kind of like what's a better like thought process behind it? Maybe like not even Javonte and Melvin Gordon, because that's even worse. Maybe like a Samaje Perine, like a Joe Mixon like type role. But even then, it's like I don't know, like. It's hard for me to really foresee like Bigsby really taking over like even a larger role than what Samaje Perine did last season. So for my thought, yeah, why not try and like push the envelope a bit with ETN? We know what the role is going to look like for him, and like we were talking earlier, for profiles of running backs that we would like to target earlier in the draft, he kind of fits that particular mold. And then afterwards, I can look at some of the other options that I might be able to get at running back in the mid to late rounds, at least. Like looking at what might be available for me, like the 7th, 8th, 9th round or so. But yeah, looking at where we've got right now. Oh yeah, I can go and do that.
While you make those picks, Rich, do you have similar thoughts on Travis Etienne? Because what happens is he's now kind of fallen back outside of the RB1s, and he usually goes in that same range as Najee Harris and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, I just think the lack of receiving is so tough. Now, when you look at Bigsby, as by the way, I clocked out on both of my picks. But yeah, when you look at like Bigsby, rookies tend not to get these snaps, right? Like these passing down snaps. Like Jahmyr Gibbs is like a special guy. They drafted him for a special role. But like to just think like they're going to throw in a guy that didn't come with elite capital in on like these passing downs, I think is probably a stretch, right? Like we don't see that happen very often. And there's some little bit of steam with like Kendre Miller too, especially if Kamara gets suspended. But like, man, rookies do not earn those snaps, man. Like if you look at like the history of like rookies in pass protection, you ain't gonna find a lot of guys, especially guys that don't come with absolute premier draft capital. So I think that's just not a lock that like Etienne comes off the field, but I still would like Etienne to just be better in the passing game overall. I mean, he was literally one of the worst graded guys. I think he was 94th in passing grade at Pro Football Focus. His catching technique is just awful. He ran a ton of routes too when was out there. The one thing I'll say about the Jaguars, maybe there are more dump offs here. Like, has anyone looked at the Jaguars offensive line headed into the season?
Bad.
It's bad.
It is unbelievably awful. And when you tack on Cam Robinson's like 6-game suspension, I mean, the ball could be coming out real hot in Jacksonville.
And they brought most of the dudes back, and that's the wild part. Like, I just don't understand like why that was their thought process, like coming into the season.
Luckily, Lawrence is a wizard at avoiding sacks and all that stuff. That's like such a great quality to have. So I think that he'll make the most of it, but it is quite the concern. Real quick, there's some breaking news, which is kind of a big deal, maybe an underrated big deal. Patriots and Devontae Parker reached an agreement, 3-year new contract worth up to $33 million. That came out of nowhere. Was not expecting that at all, but that moves the needle with DeAndre Hopkins, I would have to assume. Similar-ish positions can play the X in that offense, and the fact that they, for whatever reason, gave him more new money is pretty shocking to me. I did not see that coming whatsoever. So he's been one of my favorite picks in best ball. When I was looking at it, he quietly had a couple monster games, and you really don't find that type of profile in the 18th round. And now that we have some conviction that he will be on the field in 2 wide receiver sets with this contract, I think he's one of the best late round picks in all of best ball.
14 million guaranteed is interesting.
That's shocking.
Where did this come from?
Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
That's wild.
So now, does that change anybody's thoughts on like Tyquan Thornton as a late round dart? Because I know at least from I agree because I was looking at just like his Thornton's like average target draft capitals, like just general athletic profile just lends itself more to the type of guy that you want to select in the later rounds. But I mean, to your point, Hayden, I mean, what was it? He had like multiple games of like 10 plus targets, like towards the end of the season. So it's interesting that they would go ahead and do that.
Patriots offense thoughts, Rich, since it's an easy one to stack in the last rounds.
Yeah, I mean, you got to feel a little bit better. I mean, 2 years ago under Josh McDaniels, and I have a lot of concerns about Josh McDaniels as a head coach, but you look at what Josh McDaniels has done as like an offensive coordinator and getting what he's gotten out of his offenses. The Patriots were a top 10 team in scoring rate per drive 2 years ago. I know Josh McDaniels gone, but what I was getting at to a circular fashion is that Matt Patricia's not calling plays this year. They actually have an offensive coordinator, and that offense actually with less talent was productive 2 years ago. And they had some real spike weeks 2 years ago. I think they had 2 50-point games in Mac Jones's rookie season too. So there is an opportunity here. And you look at Devontae Parker. I know me and Hayden had an exchange with him on Twitter a while ago because he pops in some of my stuff too. I mean, he averaged 17.5 yards per catch last year. He still wins in man covered. He still wins in the contested catch game. We're just trying to run into, a couple big games, right? So like, I have no problem with him. He's a guy I've drafted a lot. Him and Corey Davis too. Corey Davis down at the back end there too. He's another guy like I don't want people to forget about, especially because of contingency value. I think Corey Davis is good at football, better than like he's been kind of saddled with his career. There's a multiverse where Corey Davis has an awesome career. But he's played with just nothing but bums his entire life at quarterback in the NFL. He's been better in the run game than Allen Lazard has been the past years. Allen Lazard, like people think of him as like an awesome blocker. Corey Davis has been better than him. I think that Corey Davis is definitely one of the guys I'm looking at too in like that Devontae Parker range, especially if, like, what if Garrett Wilson got hurt, right? Like he's going to run a ton of routes with Aaron Rodgers. Like I still think he has like 6 to 8 touchdown kind of in his range of outcomes anyways without an injury, but yeah, we're talking about these dusty guys that like your dynasties left for dead and Devontae Parker and Corey Davis. But
everyone on Underdog only likes the young players. So just draft the old guys that we've seen them be top 50 fantasy wide receivers in the 18th round. Easy as that. Yeah. Also with Corey Davis, very unlikely, but there's still a chance that they would outright release him or trade him. And there's some teams, the Chiefs, that could use somebody like Corey Davis, like where all of a sudden, bang, we found a perfect landing spot for him. So all these old guys, like, for every Tyquan Thornton, I'm just been drafting a Devontae Parker or someone like that. It's not the sexy pick. You're not going to get any likes on the Twitter machine, but you might be able to get some ROI.
And Thornton's the one whose ADP, I think, surged to like 165, 169.
Yeah.
Again, just because he was the younger individual. And I guess helped Corain win $2 million in week 17 only.
That normally helps.
All right, you have already started the Charger stack at the end here, Chris. Justin Herbert, you had Keenan Allen, Cortland Sutton for week 17. Any other thoughts going in here? George Kittle as well, rounding out that elite tier of tight ends before Rich took Kyle Pitts on the comeback.
Yeah, I was kind of like I was waffling over like Kittle. I mean, Kittle or Pitts at this point. I know that my colleague over at Fantasy Life, Dwayne McFarland, has been hyping up like Pitts over the last week or so. Do like the talent, but it's just I think almost going back to what we were just talking about. I mean, Kerrane won with the Kittle on his roster too. So I mean, it was luck for Pat. I mean, it could be luck for myself as well. But yeah, trying to at least get the week 17 correlation. I might prefer, we'll see if he makes it back to me at some point, but like any of the guys that might be going from the Denver squad later, like I haven't minded like grabbing like Dulcich later on. If I could possibly grab, like if I'm going like the late round tight end route, Tim Patrick, I know that even like the GM like talked about like the loss of Tim Patrick last season as being one of the quote unquote excuses for Russell Wilson not playing like up to like, you know, his expected level. But we'll see, having another third option there in the offense might be useful for him. So any of those late round options that might be available for a bring back have been kind of like the way I've been targeting it at this point.
Since you're on the clock, Rich, I'm
on it this time. I made the last two picks, to be fair. I took Kyle Pitts because of the auto pick of Justin Fields, not to force the week 17 stack, but I mean, I think that's also fair value for Kyle Pitts too as well. And especially in these formats, because you look at Kyle Pitts and the way he was utilized last year. I mean, we just got to find a way to get more freebies, right? For Kyle Pitts. Like the greatest gift of Kyle Pitts is he is kind of this unicorn as an athlete, and the Falcons kind of fell in love with that last year and only gave him nothing but like deep targets. And that's why his efficiency was bad. So we just got to find a way, Arthur Smith, to get him more freebies, right? Give him more bunnies. Because when you compare him to like other high ADOT tight ends, like say like a Mark Andrews still gets like a plethora of shallow to intermediate targets too. If we can just get Kyle Pitts more freebies, then we're going to get a little more balance.
Well, fingers crossed it happens in a year where they also traded for Jonnu Smith. We can only hope.
Only other thing on the Pitts discussion, it feels like one of those injuries that's never brought up, but he did tear his MCL, which seems bad, and he still hasn't practiced yet. So that's something at least to monitor and training. It was like one of like the final injury things where like I'd love to see him practicing on the field.
Yeah, I agree.
What offense do you think early on as you're doing these drafts, Rich, is the most undervalued?
Well, I think that was the Falcons for sure. You just look, the Falcons were in 15 one-score games last year. Like this is a competitive team, and they literally had the second to worst, quarterback inaccuracy rate in the NFL. That could be something that exists again, but I think that they're definitely a team that, and they run like a fun style of football too. Like they take shot plays, they run a lot of play action. We just like want more play volume and more overall passing attempts. I also say like I lean the Raiders too, man. Like I say like Josh McDaniels get like for as terrible as a head coach he is, like his teams score points. And Derek Carr had one of his worst seasons ever last year, and they're still at the front of the league and scoring rate per drive. We talk about rookie Mac Jones 3 years ago with like basically just kind of altering everything around what Cam Newton had left. They were still a functional offense. So I think the Raiders are still probably a team that's going to score more points than people think.
And so where does that put Devontae Adams in your rankings? Because right now he does go around Amon-Ra, Garrett Wilson, sometimes behind those players.
Oh, yeah. I was on I did a live draft with Herzig this week, and we got him at 207. Which is wild, man. Yeah. To me to think that he's going like he can go even get like you're getting Devontae Adams, the guy who's led the NFL in touchdowns in 2 of the past 3 years, not just with Aaron Rodgers, but with Derek Carr too as well. You're able to get him as over some of these guys that we are just more built on hope and upside.
That's wild. Okay, Chris, it's coming back to you. What are your thoughts here at the 9th, 10th turn?
So 9-10, was trying to get the Tua stack since I had taken like Jalen earlier. Just pivoted like real quick. Looking back at like the week 16 like correlations, I know, or week 17 correlation, Minnesota and like Green Bay like play each other that week. So just going ahead and like pivoting, grabbing Kirk Cousins. Know that team like the Vikings, top 5, top 6 in pass rate over expectation last season. Playing against Green Bay in week 17. So it can also grab like AJ Dillon, like the same spot. So it just kind of works out with that mini correlation right there. I'll figure out like what sort of like pass catching options I can get with Kirk Cousins on the back end.
What is Ian doing here? I see four receivers.
Who knows?
What do you start with? Kelsey. The Kelsey fell a little bit too behind Eckler.
Yeah.
Tony Pollard on the comeback, and then he went DK. Okay.
Oh, there's Geno Smith coming. Yep, there it is.
Yeah. And anchor RB. All right.
I love Geno doubles.
Yeah.
Well, you can get unique with them too, because it is possible not only get DK, but you can also get JSN and Lockett together too.
Yeah, and then run it back with I mean, I can almost guarantee you, since Seattle plays Pittsburgh in week 17, Jaylen Warren is going to be on his squad at some point here soon.
How do you see that situation shaking out, Rich? Because I know JSN gets touted pretty heavily for having presumably an immediate workload, even though Lockett and DK are obviously still there.
Yeah, it's tough to project, right? It's a lot of guesswork. I mean, Seattle's not a team that's run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. They were 26 last year in 11 personnel rate, but also when you don't have 3 good wide receivers, you're not going to run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets. Pretty simple as that. I'm curious to see who he takes away from when he does play. Obviously, signs would point to Tyler Lockett a little bit. I know Tyler Lockett's been perpetually kind of undervalued. Hold on, I'm on the clock again. I'll make sure I'll mess this up. Go ahead. Someone else talk through this.
All right, we're watching you. Jahan Dotson, Jameson Williams. That's what you had early on. As you mentioned at the top of the show as well, 3 potential pass catching options falling in James Cook. We get Tyler Boyd, who universally slips usually in the 10th round.
And I love Tyler Boyd.
I was already making a bet kind of against Jamar Chase, so I might as well sort of into it.
Yeah.
Since I already have T. Higgins, so we might as well go that route.
I love the wide receivers with like dual contingent value, like the Josh Palmers from last year, KJ Osborne. They feel like they're just like always a couple rounds too press. They're not going to absolutely go off, but I think that you can easily find yourselves into them not being terrible picks at that spot. I think there's a reasonable chance that just a couple missed games and you're in the money.
Right.
Oh yeah.
But talking about the Seattle wideouts again, like I'm really curious about DK Metcalf and the usage he had last year and how consistent it will be with JSN, because the Seattle made a really seismic shift in how they used DK Metcalf last year. He was used as a full field wide receiver for the first time in his career instead of just kind of like a guy that relied on shot plays and end zone targets. And he actually underperformed his touchdown expectation, whereas Tyler Lockett's made a career of overachieving in scoring touchdowns, so we can't really say that's something he can't continue to keep going. But DK Metcalf was used as like an all-field wide receiver, like to a similar level as like what Jamar Chase was, and it led to a career high in targets. And he ran unlucky in touchdowns, so I'm kind of thinking he's looking a little undervalued to me. But how steady is that going to be now with a guy like JSN? We only had a 1-year sample of DK Metcalf being used like that, so it could be fleeting as well.
And I still think, regardless of the wide receiver ADPs, Geno Smith is tremendously undervalued. If we can get a full season, since he did fall off post-bye, offensive line was injured. It was Geno Smith's like really full year as a starter. If we can get a full season of it, he's definitely a top 10 quarterback potential.
But for fantasy, he was still good. Even like his kind of regression halfway through the year, and he didn't look as good in EPA per dropback. For fantasy, he still only Patrick Mahomes matched him in multi-touchdown games last year.
That's good stuff.
And it always looked sustainable. There's some quarterbacks where you're like, dude, this just looks ridiculous. He scrambles, he buys times when he needs to, and his eyes are always downfield. He's got the perfect receivers. I thought his ball placement was phenomenal. Always prone for a couple dumb mistakes, but most quarterbacks are, and that doesn't really bother me. An interception is basically doesn't matter for me at all for fantasy football.
Some of his highlights, some of his throws were the highlight of the first half of the season.
The Lockett Saints touchdown stands out as one of the better throws. That throw was amazing. It was up there. If PJ Walker didn't have that throw to DJ Moore, like that would be in contention for throw of the year. But
that's still one of my favorites of the whole year.
That was insane.
That PJ Walker throw, like we'll never probably see PJ Walker again, but like he'll live in infamy for that throw. I'll never forget that play. Like.
That how was that like not like the best play we've ever seen? Period. Like that was absurd.
I mean, what a ridiculous throw that was.
Yeah. And then the refs wind up ruining it by like throwing the flag and everything.
Yeah, the Rodgers Hail Mary to Janis too. Like that was like it was like on that level because where your body's moving and just the arm strength, like just
and game situation too.
Yeah, just absolute sick throw.
Yeah.
Let's see here as we avert from the draft really quick for important stuff.
Oh yeah. I mean, just
This is the farthest he's thrown a football of
In his life?
In his life, that by far. I mean, that is
Hey, what
a
a throw. Hey,
missile.
what is
I
that
forgot
stupid
how
throw?
good that was.
it was good. I
That is
mean,
a missile.
and
The QB, like the back version, the QB cam of the Lockett throw is excellent, but like that throw is just, I mean, that was the throw of the year. Like that's just, you can't compete with it.
no, you can't. And especially at that point in the season when everybody was like, well, the Panthers like passing game sucks. DJ Moore is just not going to be a wide receiver. He had to have been like feeling that angst like that entire time, and then to go out and do that against a divisional opponent like that I knew in that moment he had to just been like, I'm ripping my helmet off. Let's fucking go.
How are you sorting through the Panthers wide receivers, Rich? Given that there's
I'm
a lot of them missed.
Look, I mean, listen, I'm adamant. Like, I don't like drafting players that play with rookie quarterbacks. It's just it's the philosophy I followed basically my whole career. I did an article on Roto-World in this like back in like 2017 about this. But like guys just underperform with rookie quarterbacks. That's why I was completely out on Deontay Johnson last year and Najee Harris. There's no reason for me to be excited about any Panthers wide receivers when I believe that Bryce Young is going to start, 17 weeks this year. And as good as Anthony Richardson is for his own personal stocks, it's the reason why I'm not drafting these Colts guys either.
I love that take.
That's
I
fair.
think with the Panthers, I've seen some speculation. Like, I mean, this is classic time for it, but I've seen some LaVisca love. I've seen some Terrace Marshall love. So I wouldn't be shocked if that's one of those teams that is quietly like rotating their wide receivers in annoying ways as well.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the Panthers are screaming to us like they want to run the football, right? Like they've got a good young defense. They've got a really underrated offensive line. They signed a running back in free agency. Like they've got a rookie quarterback. They're in a division where they can win low scoring games. Like they want to run the rock, man. They ain't hiding.
That entire division is gonna be so run heavy. It's gonna be wild.
I can't even like outside of the Panthers and the Falcons, like just being able to, but honestly, I could see Panthers, Falcons, or the Saints coming out of that division, like for the playoffs at this point. I could honestly tell a story about for any of them, like making it into the playoffs, at least for a wild card spot.
Just not the Buccaneers.
Just not the Bucs. Like I can't do Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield. I'm not doing that.
I've been waiting for that Bucs worst record bet to drop. Just give it to me. First book to give it to
Especially
me.
with a defensive like throwback head coach. Like just,
he can't wait. He can't wait for Tom Brady to leave.
44 pass attempts per game. It's going to cut it in half.
But who's actually going to run the ball for the Bucs? Like, there's no way that Rachaad White can carry the rock up the middle that many times. Somebody's going to have to step up. I feel like could they be a weird Zeke or Kareem Hunt team? Like, does Lenny want to go back there? I'm not sure.
And I mean, their offensive line is worse on paper, right? Like, because you lose two starters in Shaq Mason and Donovan Smith. Obviously, you get Ryan Jensen back for a full season, which is a bonus. But I mean, it's rough, man. And Brady masks so much of the pressure stuff from that offensive line because he just got rid of the football in nanoseconds. Like, that's not going to exist this year.
No,
it's certainly an interesting offense. Do you think the receivers are undervalued? I know we had Ben Gretsch on a couple weeks ago, and he was trying to sell to me that he does believe at least Chris Godwin is somewhat going overlooked right now at his ADP.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote about this, about like using projections and stats and season-long stuff because Godwin does show up well in my season-long projections and undervalued based on ADP. But the question is, what are we getting, right? Like, is Chris Godwin a guy that ends up as the wide receiver 18 and he's the wide receiver 25 and someone's like, hey, I got value? Does he give you spike weeks? Is he just give a guy that's giving you like 6 for 65 continuously but doesn't miss a game and gets there like accumulatively? It's that's a different argument, right? Like, so like where are the spike weeks going to come from? I know that it's easy to kind of see what happened with Seattle last year and say like, all right, we kind of looked at the Seattle situation and we undervalued those guys, but are we really, really expecting Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask capable of have a season that Geno Smith just had? Like in the range of outcomes?
No.
Is that something we're betting
Literally
on?
no.
Like,
no.
I mean, so I look at Godwin, I think he probably is. Like when the season stats come out at the end of the year, and you say like, yeah, Chris Godwin beat ADP, but what does that really mean, right? Is that the true definition of value in fantasy football? Is that the criteria? What are we getting? Like, and I feel like similar like about Deontay Johnson, a guy that's getting a lot of steam too as being undervalued, but like where is the upside in a guy like Deontay Johnson, right? Like, especially in some of the ADP goes around. And I don't want to just be like an upside hunter and say like we have to have these spike weeks. But I look at Deontay Johnson and I see Chris Godwin light, like similar. Like it's just arbitrage on Chris Godwin. And do I really want any of those guys? I think that's the question I want to ask.
Jordan Addison in that range for me. Everything's there for him.
Mm-hmm. Looks like DraftKings does have Bucks' worst record at plus 900. Cardinals at plus 200 chalk. Rich, any thoughts on Kyler Murray and the Cardinals offense, since that's kind of what everyone's dabbling in and trying to figure out like if he's even going to play? Because I know like Adam Hutchinson, Edwin Porras, they think that he's going to be recovered in the first month of the season. And so like return much earlier than everyone else is expecting.
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that if he's ready to play there, that he's not going to play. Right. Like this is the NFL, man. Like this is, if Kyler Murray, a guy that they've got hundreds of $1 million already invested into, is ready to play football and they're not playing him, like that's franchise malpractice, right? I don't think we need the conspiracy theory ourselves out of that. Like when he's ready to play, he's going to play.
Yeah. My thing with Kyler is, will it even matter if he's playing? Because he was a fringe quarterback one last year.
And it was all because of rushing.
And it's all because of rushing. Like, I mean, like he might be back and then we might be ranking him as the quarterback 15 on the week because the Cardinals will be projected for 17 points. And I don't care if Kyler's out there. We're only going to be able to rank him so high. And I don't see any reason for Kyler to be scrambling around. That's also a miserable offensive line.
As James Conner carries the world until he gets injured.
Inevitably. I know a number of folks are probably going to be wish casting that's going to happen to him at some point, just because that was his calling card when he was still in Pittsburgh, even though it really hasn't been a thing since he's moved to Arizona.
All right, Cole Kmet, Sam Laporta, and someone who's not auto-drafted, Tajay Spears.
I'm making these picks.
You're doing it. What about Tajay Spears? Since this is kind of this range where, as you can see, Tyler Algier, Chuba Hubbard, Kenneth Gainwell, all those guys usually start going off the board right here.
Yeah, I would have liked the Chuba Hubbard. He's one of kind of my favorite contingency picks. The reason we just talked about, like, they're going to run the football a ton, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so, and I believe Chuba Hubbard is going to play third downs anyes. Like, I think he's going to be the passing down back. I know people are trying to coax themselves into Miles Sanders being a 3-down back, but he's literally been one of the worst receiving backs, even with opportunity, since his rookie season. He's just perpetually gotten worse and worse as a receiver. So he might not even have that role. So I like Chuba Hubbard as a contingency bet. But since I got auto-drafted Justin Fields earlier on, way before I would have even considered a quarterback, I figured I would just kind of throw another stacking dart on him since I couldn't get DJ Moore. And the Bears seemingly probably have already drafted Darnell Mooney's replacement. So we just threw a tight end dart on adding Cole Kmet here.
Chris, you went Herbert. Is that QB 4 through 8 range usually something you're targeting, or how are you handling the taxes we have to pay on the big three right now?
Typically, yeah. I was looking into it. A lot of the folks that made it into the playoffs in the past couple of BBMs, that they actually haven't completely like strayed away from leaning into whatever the quarterback draft mode is of that particular season. When it was, 4th, 5th, 6th round, it was cool to draft quarterbacks there. Let's say in BBM2, that's where a lot of the playoff guys, like were folks that made it in the playoffs, like were hitting their quarterbacks. And even last year, when a lot of them were, when we saw quarterbacks being moved up a little bit more, that was still something that like they were still adhering to a lot of the quarterback principles or quarterback drafting principles at that particular time. So I'm not trying to at least completely avoid drafting quarterbacks or anything like that, but just being mindful more or less of like, how often you are like straying into that particular strategy, and then kind of taking things from there.
Oh, Chris drafted Chuba Hubbard. I was looking at his team.
He did. Yeah.
He's been on my mind. Like he's another like a late round target of mine for that exact reason. Like he was the passing down back over Donta Foreman last season. So why not?
Yeah. I like that. What were you going to ask me, Daigle?
What about the big three quarterbacks for you and how you're handling that?
Yeah, I mean, they dropped a little bit since the start of the year.
I think what's happened, Hayden and I have talked about this, is that since people can't get their stacking partners, they're now like naturally letting Hurts and Mahomes fall like 6 to 8 spots more.
Yeah, I mean, it's still, for me, the way I play fantasy football, it's still so hard for me to ever click the quarterback button in the second or third round. Like, I can't get like mentally past it, right? There's occasionally where you start with like Chase and you can go like Chase, Higgins, Mahomes, like in that, or do something, or like go Kelsey, Higgins, Mahomes, and you kind of get like that week 17 stack. But outside of that, like, I have a really hard time just mentally getting through that. I always feel like I can gambit the quarterback position.
I keep doing as much research on I can, and every single thing I do, it just showing that the elite quarterbacks now in half PPR using like underdog scoring are actually standing out. Like, I looked at the spike weeks, I've looked at fantasy points over replacement, I've looked at the advance rates, I've looked at all this stuff. Man, like, to me, like how I built so many of my teams, like I want one elite stack and then a couple pretty shitty stacks. So I keep drafting the elite quarterbacks, and I think that they're actually being undervalued. I'm kind of on an island by myself there, but I keep trying to pull some studies, and I can't find ones that's at least in half PPR at best ball where the elite quarterbacks are starting to stand out. Maybe I'm just chasing noise though, but like,
no, we've been so good.
Jalen Hurts, all these guys, it seems like there's going to be layups for the next couple of years.
Yeah, the past 3 years, especially. I mean, we've been so good at setting the market at quarterback and just looking at like correlation of ADP and scoring. We've been just so good at diagnosing. It's because it's that subset, that archetype of guys, right? Like, it's the guys that can run and pass. Now, it used to be the old Konami code stuff would be like Cam Newton, Taysom Hill. Then you maybe run into the one, Cam Newton 2015 season where like you get the 40 passing touchdowns. But like, now these guys are running and they're throwing the 35 plus passing touchdowns. So it's really hard to combat that subset of archetype of quarterback just because the ceiling's so high. And that's what makes things so fragile, of taking guys like in that tier of Herbert, Lawrence, and Burrow, kind of like the pocket passers, because they are more fragile. Like, you saw like Herbert ran cold last year, and like, you're dead like because that quarterback has no outs after that. So it makes it kind of interesting, just that the fantasy community is calibrated and circled around of like at least diagnosing like, hey, these are the guys we should be drafting from a physical archetype stance.
Daigle, just real quick, do you think that, like, how sustainable is like the Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, Josh Allen? Like, these guys are all in the very prime of their careers. We've seen them for multiple seasons, not Fields and Hurts as much, but like Mahomes and the other guys. To me, it seems like this trend is just welcome to the new NFL. Tom Brady is not the number one fantasy quarterback, and he only had so much of a ceiling. Like, to me, there's like 6 or 7 guys that could do Lamar Jackson, for crying out loud.
It's what Rich is talking about. It's what I've talked about on this show time and time again in the past, and why I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Because yes, it could be the new era. It could have also just been those 3 in particular standing out last year, especially since we have the amazing pandemic NFL season skewing all numbers, since rules didn't exist and all the flags were just held in refs' pockets the entire time. It was a different era when football was good and scoring was allowed. So I don't know. That's why I'm mixing it in, because I think it could be the way. But honestly, I still keep coming back to the idea that the big 3 regress back to the QB 4 through 12 range, which is why I end up instead with Herbert, Fields, Geno, and Daniel Jones is kind of the tier drop off. Well, Deshaun Watson's probably the tier breaker in there, if you have faith in Cleveland's offense bouncing back.
Well, yeah, I mean, to
both sides can be argued.
I mean, to your points, I think the NFL really is moving to that, because out of the pocket passers that have been drafted in like the last, let's say, 6 or 7 years, how many of them have gotten second contracts? Goff, and he didn't even really get into his second contract. So if the NFL is already kind of signaling, or teams are already kind of signaling that they're not valuing like those types of guys, I mean, hell, we're already hearing about Mac Jones potentially being on the move from New England. So if the NFL is already kind of moving to this archetype that you have to be able to move, if not like, straight up rushers like Fields, Lamar Jackson, or whatever, but at least be a scrambler, because scrambling is probably one of the most efficient plays like out there. So if you can't even scramble, like a la Kenny Pickett, then what value can you bring as just a quarterback, not a passer, just as a quarterback to the team?
Yeah. I keep drafting Lamar and Fields. Those are my 2 that really stand out. It's like a 1 tier below. They can match the upside of the other guys. Lower odds of actually realizing that upside, but at that point, I'm getting to the wide receivers where I'm like, oh, Christian Watson. Like Christian Watson can be the freaking wide receiver 39 this year. That would not surprise me at all. Like,
could be.
Once we get into that range, like, sign me all the way up. And with Fields, I don't mind doing Fields solo. That obviously I would prefer to stack him up, but if I have to stack him up with Claypool with my last pick or with Cole Kmet later on, like please, like I'll mix in some other stacks throughout that. Same thing with Lamar Jackson. I'll single stack him, no problem.
It's interesting too. I mean, Lamar's easy to stack, obviously not with Andrews, but like Bateman, Flowers, anything you want to do later, even Isaiah Likely as a tack on, who's obviously he's like purely contingent value. But in these best ball leagues, like you might have a week where Isaiah Likely plays a half of football and has a touchdown, right? Like,
yep.
There's a lot of options still for Lamar because Lamar's like basically settled in as the concrete QB4, but no one else has really moved. Like none of the wide receivers are moving.
It's Lamar and Andrews. Since you can get them together at the turn, and that's kind of what's happened and why their ADPs have surged.
It's so funny to look at the draft board and look at the teams. They always fall in like in a row on the draft board because everyone's stacking. So if you can manipulate that and to find uniqueness angles, that's like the best way to do. Like for example, like reaching on Lamar and Andrews at the 2-3 turn. You're reaching on both of those picks, but you can really stack up some unique teams like Justin Jefferson because they're typically on the other side of the board.
It's the Kelsey Lamar theory, and how many teams actually have Lamar Jackson stacked with Kelsey because everyone goes straight to Andrews. That's kind of what I do now in the Best Ball Millionaire.
Yep.
And as you shared last week now, and like the Dalmatians and everything, I just draft a normal team because everyone else gets 6 quarterbacks or try some dumb shit.
Wait till you see weekly winners. Maybe everyone's going to go absolutely nuts in the best ways just to do it.
That sounds fun to me, man.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. I believe next week's guests are Ian Harditz and Dwayne McFarland. So we'll definitely get some weekly winner drafts going next week.
Should be fun.
Ian just messaged. He's on the treadmill doing this draft.
That's why he hasn't answered. I actually sent him the show link. I was like, if you're in the draft, you might as well join the show.
Yeah, he's on the treadmill.
Yeah, I don't know how you guys draft when you guys are at like the big cardio underdog thing. I can't focus, man.
I did it last year. It's tough.
Chris, I signed up for another 30-miler.
Oh, you did? Oh, let's go.
I'm out here playing Marvel Snap while I'm on the bike.
The Chicago Lakefront 30-miler is October 28th. I'm going to run it. It's Saturday, too, so it doesn't take away from football.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought you and JJ were going to do a half.
We are going to do a half. Well,
okay.
Damn.
I keep promoting him to do a half. I'm pretty sure he's going to do it, but it's going to take some pushing.
Just shame him into it.
Leone wants to join us, too.
Yeah, shame him into it. Bully him into it.
All three of you guys been crushing all the cardio stuff. I'm missing out. I need to get on.
Yeah, until
you're young,
September.
Though. You're good, man. You don't got to worry about it. You got about 15 years.
It's not going to last much longer.
Yeah.
I got sniped in the 18th round.
On Zamir?
Yeah, I was looking. Zamir White was looking to be my Mr. Irrelevant. I was hoping.
I like Zamir.
You got to change it now. Who's Mr. Irrelevant? You get to show the world your favorite last pick.
God.
Josh Reynolds. You have Goff?
No, he already went, I think.
I took Josh Reynolds.
Oh, nice. I love Josh Reynolds. I would say the quietest couple games of 10 targets that we can remember from last year.
6 weeks without Jameson. I'll take it.
Gus, yes.
Dude. We did Gus Edwards. We Gus bust on the way out.
Yeah. Gus is still there. Interesting.
That's a solid
gone.
There. I like that one.
But Zamir White's interesting. So even that you look at the history of guys that have had as many touches as Josh Jacobs, they tend to miss time the year after. Obviously, Derrick Henry's the one exception because the dude is
he's the exception for all of it.
He is the exception. He's the human exception.
Yeah. And then you add the contract and the other stuff that's going on. It's just like there are worse like options to take than to throw a dart on Zamir White. And like I said, I really believe the Raiders are going to score more points than people think. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I know you were pounding out your tiers at Sharp Football and you're getting the draft kit ready, Rich. What's something that you learned while writing about all these positions? Maybe a player or offense you got significantly higher on.
I mean, listen, you're going to find a ton of stuff in the tiers on players. Obviously, when you read something I write, I'm going to try to put something there that you haven't read. If you've read 100 Saquon Barkley articles, I'm going to try to make sure I have something you didn't read in those other 99. So I'm hopefully that for every player, I've got something unique to find. But yeah, like I said, like the DK Metcalf stuff stuck under me, like his usage, I think kind of flew under the radar a lot. But yeah, just everything, man. I've got some on every player, though. I don't want to give all the goods away.
Okay, that's completely fair. Chris, also, we've seen some of Rich's favorite last round picks. I know you had Hubbard here, but what are a couple of your others here from like rounds 14, 15 on?
Like Josh Reynolds, like Hayden and I were just talking about, has been one of the big ones. Because when I was like going through and looking at some sportsbook data, like Detroit, 6th highest in terms of implied points per game, like this upcoming season, but yet it's really just Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs that we're really targeting in like the top 100 picks. So it's just like something's got to give. Like either the sports books are off, or like, you know, it's Sam Laporta like is going to hit. Jared Goff like really like does start to take off and has a full season of being that efficient quarterback we saw him being, like what, top 5, top 6 in EPA per play, like he was last year with him and Amon-Ra. So we'll see how that goes. But I've been digging on like trying to like target Clyde Edwards-Helaire towards the back end. Don't know about like, because of the injury that he sustained like last season, which kind of like hampered his return like to the game. And also just, I don't know, is Isaiah Pacheco really going to be like that workhorse back that we saw him to be? Jerick McKinnon going to work in for passing down work? I think if CEH really starts to rotate in with those guys where he's going at right now, not to say that he's free or anything like that, but for the projected workload on that offense attached to Patrick Mahomes, 17th round dart is definitely worth that. So those are two guys along with Hubbard that I've been targeting once we get into like the late teens.
And Hayden, I know we've talked about sneaky winners from OTAs. Corey Davis was one of them. Zonovan Knight, I think, is a fine last pick. Dwayne McBride over Ty Chandler, just trying to get Minnesota's backup situation figured out. A couple others as well.
Luke Musgrave's mine. I agree with the CH stuff. I've watched Isaiah Pacheco. I don't think he's very good. He runs hard, but I don't think he's very good. I think there's room for CH to get involved. Also, a dual contingent play if McKinnon gets injured. I think that's CH's job and vice versa. But yeah, to me, Luke Musgrave, I'm trying to build for late round tight ends to play the ping pong touchdown game, the position with the most variance and tied to touchdown. So Luke Musgrave is one of those guys. Trey McBride's one of those guys. I'll mix in
Dawson Knox went in the 17th round in this draft too. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, man, all these guys. I mean, a lot of these guys just don't get drafted all that much. Like Hunter Henry's probably getting drafted only about 5-10% of the time. Luke Musgrave's getting a little bit more steam, but I think any of these guys, all they have to do is score 6 touchdowns this year, and like there's a chance that Luke Musgrave could beat some of the rookie narratives around the position just because his only competition for snaps is another rookie. So I'm not sure if Christian Watson's like your traditional number 1 wide receiver either. Jaden Reed, kind of a bad profile. Romeo Dobbs, kind of a poor man's Corey Davis. I think that Luke Musgrave is going to be my late round guy.
Rich.
Yeah, Isaiah Pacheco runs like a 5-year-old you gave a 2-liter of Mountain Dew.
Yes.
He just like he just runs as fast as he can in a straight line.
I appreciate it.
Upright.
Yes.
Sometimes it's into the back of an offensive lineman. I mean, it's why he's so hard to tackle. But he, I think it was Austin Eckler had commentary on him. He said he runs like a kick returner. And that's like the most obvious comp. I think it was with Harmon.
Yeah.
And he's like, he'd be fun if he just learns how to play running back because he's just running full speed.
And he's old. It's too late. He's like, what, 24 already for Pacheco? Yeah. So like CH is the CH probably doesn't run hard enough, but CH like hits the right.
At least has some shiftiness.
Really matters.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a multiverse where CEH kind of worked out. I mean, I just think too many injuries happened to CEH, right? To kind of probably bounce back at this point. But listen, as long as the old man Jerick McKinnon is out there and Pat trusts him and passing down. So Isaiah Pacheco ran 5 pass routes on 3rd down last year. So real tough. I mean, listen, that's why Jerick McKinnon signs there every year, man. He's trusted.
Easy work.
Yep.
Rich, tell everyone where they can find your work.
SharpFootballAnalysis.com. We just finished the book. That'll be coming out next week. Obviously, the 2023 preview book will be coming out. All my tiers, the wide receivers will be posted on Friday. That's the wide receiver article is literally the largest fantasy article that I've ever written.
Wow.
So it's just a mountain of information and a mountain of splits, all kinds of information, data that you won't find in a lot of spots. So definitely check that stuff out. Otherwise, it's June, man, and I'm going to see Daigle this weekend. We're going to go hang out and
debauchery. Yeah, I've seen a lot of Ohio. I've never seen Put in Bay, so I guess get excited.
That's going to be awesome. Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to be the most responsible one. I got a lot of men with kids who are just getting released into the wild for a couple of nights. So I feel like I'm going to do some corralling, but that's okay. I'm excited for it. Chris, what about you and everything going on at Fantasy Life?
Yeah, you can find me over at fantasylife.com. No, like not a big announcement, but I'm getting back into my bullshit. So find me on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX, because I got into the game actually analyzing weather impacts. So I've been going back over some of the historical trends now that I've had a bit more of an understanding of the advanced passing metrics, fold those into a lot of the weather trends. And so you'll see me tweeting about that over the next week or so, because I was just looking at last season, 27 games last season with 15 mile per hour winds or more. 4 of them were actually up in Cleveland. The other 4 are just over in Chicago. So a lot of the takes that we have about weather do tend to be like survivor bias. Like we remember a lot of the Cleveland bad games, or just the rainstorm game that happened in Chicago and all of that. But it just seems like a lot of the occurrences happen to be like in those particular areas. So I want to try and map all that out, see if there's any signal to that noise. And then just kind of like I've been doing since I got into the game, helping people figure out, all right, what's real, what's not. So look for that over the next couple of weeks. And
Hayden, new tournament underdog, and I know your strategy article is coming out soon.
Yeah, Josh, I'm going to do a stream tomorrow once we release the payout structure and all that fun stuff. So we'll get into all that. Chris, I got a question for you, though. And this is not a bit. It sounds like a bit. Definitely not a bit.
Yeah.
Do you have week 17 weather forecast? Because my theory, the way to stack and correlate for week 17 is to dome it up or play one of the coasts, because if there's a blizzard that takes out the entire East Coast on week 17 and all those games go under, all of a sudden we're
Miami and Baltimore.
Can we get a week 17 weather forecast today?
No, not today. But actually, I was going to look at like when some of those games like pop up, because I think once we do get into November, December, a lot of folks assume it's going to be more snow, more sleet, more just bad weather in general. But I do want to try and look at like, when are these games actually happening? So that it's not just the where, but the when. And I think even I saw like Davis tweeting something like it's an El Nino year.
Super El Nino.
Yeah. So
what does that mean?
I don't even know what that. I'm gonna have to
only
stands for the Nino.
Yeah. I know it means like you said, Rich, it means the Nino. But like all of that stuff, it affects the market. So does it matter if it doesn't? And if most folks are going to be pivoting towards some of those dome games, like Detroit, Dallas, for instance, then maybe it might be worthwhile to pivot to the games that might be played outdoors, like Miami, Baltimore.
Well, as someone who just built a Falcons Bears stack, kind of an accident, I'm gonna need that to happen.
Yeah, I'll be talking about it for sure.
Lots more to talk about. The football season, especially for all of us, really begins in July after the holidays. So everyone enjoy yourself, touch grass, be safe. And of course, we will be back at this time next week with more guests for the happy hour. Until then, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you then.